All right, we're back for another week of KiS Organics Q&A. Appreciate everyone that joins us every week. Look forward to seeing your questions. How are you doing, Brandon?
Oh man, slowly but surely recovering here. So yeah, I need to eat. I need to gain some weight back, and otherwise I'm pretty good. I'm just exhausted. But I got to quit blaming the brain fog on COVID at this point. It's just me. So yeah, pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. I've been, maybe this is an interesting topic to folks. I've been getting my beds ready for another cycle here to start up again soon, and so I didn't add. So I let the beds go completely dry in my grow room. So I haven't been growing since whenever the last cycle ended. Was that maybe like February or
Yeah,
March? Can't really
that's
remember.
yeah. It's
Right
been a
around
while.
in there. And I know a lot of people wonder, what do you do with your soil when you're not growing? And because my soil was in my grow room in those beds, I did nothing. I shut it all down. I didn't want to keep it going while I wasn't using it. So I didn't water it. I didn't do anything. I just cleaned everything up and left it. So now I'm going to go back in and re-wetting the beds slowly using just my hose water, and because I've had my water tested, and a dram water breaker. And then I've just been doing that over the last week, just whenever I remember, going in there and giving it some water and just slowly rehydrating the soil. So yeah, I know that the microbes are going to recover. Before I plant my plants into it, I want to add. So this cycle, I decided um, I'm not going to do a soil test. I'm gonna go with the recommendation from Andrew from KiS and just show a cycle with the nutrient pack. And so that's kind of an interesting topic too, because I'm gonna give it my best guess for how much to add to reamend to get my levels up to where I believe I should be for the cycle. But I'm gonna have to monitor a little more than if I had done a soil test, where I could feel a lot more confident about knowing all the levels of the different nutrients and amending accordingly. But I know a lot of people don't, don't soil test or don't have access. So I wanted to show kind of what that process looks like. So we'll give it a go this run. And then the other thing I'm hoping to test out is under canopy lighting. So I've reached out to BIOS. I still need to have a conversation with Fluence and see if either of them are interested in working with me on setting up an under canopy grow to show what that might look like in comparison to just top lighting. Because I just got back from Photo X, which is like a invite only exclusive science based conference that they throw. They were throwing it every year. It kind of went away for a while. Came back last year. I got the invite this year, and it was pretty. It was pretty awesome. So a lot of the research is around lighting. So they talked a lot about different spectrums. They announced some new stuff happening with Fluence, which I can talk about if people are interested. They talked about like the effects of different lighting, like I said, different lighting spectrums, different lighting intensity, different lighting photo period. Not only the research they're doing, but also the research happening at the university level. And it was really interesting. So, yeah, I don't know. We could start there, or if you had a topic, Brandon, we could talk about something else.
Yeah, I think somebody just asked, medically minded, just asked if we'd ever heard of force of nature spray. Would this be harmful to plants? I was just doing a little Googling on my phone, and it looks like the only thing I see is for like eczema and stuff like that. So I must be looking at the wrong thing. So if you want to email that over to us, we could take a look at it and see if it looks like something that would be effective. We do have a bunch of stuff that we like, Epishield, Suff Oil, things that we know are safe and are productive as far as spraying for target pests. So I would definitely go the Epishield route or the Suff Oil route as far as efficacy and pricing. Um, I thought some of the stuff that you were talking about at Photo X to the Patreon group was pretty interesting and well received. If you wanted to touch on some of that stuff. I don't.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I do want to touch on the oils because I don't know what Force of Nature spray is, but let's just assume it's an essential oil product, or for growers that are making their own sprays out of, I don't know, clove or lavender or garlic or whatever, or even buying some of these products like Lost Coast Therapy and things like that. The reason that we like um, the reason that we like EpiShield, not only because there's research around it, but these are all 25B products, which means as long as I'm using ingredients that the EPA decides are like universally pretty safe, I don't have to go through the EPA registration, which is a really rough process. It sucks. So a lot of companies come with these 25B products. The reason we like EpiShield is because um, there's a lot of research around it, unlike a lot of these other products. And that research not only supports this, but they're able to use lower concentrations of these oils because of the formulation and the different things that they're putting into that formulation. And by using less oil and getting a higher, mortality rate of whatever the target pest is, you have less risk of phytotoxicity and less risk of residues and other things with your crops. So that's why I really like, for example, the products from Bioworks that you mentioned, is because there's a lot of research to support them. And you can't just with pesticides, especially, you can't just look at a label and read the ingredients and think you could recreate it or fully understand exactly an apples to apples comparison between different pesticides just because they use the same ingredients. So I just want to throw that out there. And to answer Green Shed, I don't have any experience with Lost Coast Therapy. I know a lot of people like it. I wasn't trying to say that to like hate on them or the company. I have no experience with it. So I should make that very clear. I just know there's a lot more research around EpiShield that I've seen personally. And so that's why I really like that product. In terms of efficacy, like I said, the concentration they're able to use is typically like 9 to 10 times lower than the average product on the market. So yeah,
Yeah.
but full disclosure, we now sell EpiShield too. So there is a slight conflict of interest there. So everyone, I recommend do your own research on it.
I was just talking to a customer on the phone kind of about this topic before we got on here. Always do a test spray. And I use Tad's bleach story as an example of how you can get burnt. But always do a test spray. I'm going to tell them myself, I screwed up something this morning. I need to spray. I've been neglecting my plants. I've been sick for about a month. And so I've got some thrips showing up in my garden. And so luckily not in my flower, but in my veggie tent. And so I normally use spinosad for that. And I grabbed 3 bottles of what I thought was spinosad. And the 2 bottles that I first poured into my sprayer um, looked identical. They were clear and looked like spinosad I'm used to seeing. And the next one was kind of brown. And I was like, uh-oh, what is this? And I looked, and the bottles look identical, but I had an insecticidal soap as well as spinosad. So I accidentally mixed all those together. And I didn't have any idea if that was going to make it more effective, less effective, more prone to phytotoxicity. Like, I have no idea what this mystery concoction I've made is. So I went and sprayed it on some plants I don't care about. And if they look good tomorrow, then I'm going to go ahead and spray my plants with it. But always, always, always do a test spray. It'll save you a lot of heartache.
And have a good sprayer. I mean, paint sprayers are not made for spraying horticultural oils and pesticides and things like that. That's why, investing in a good sprayer from like Dram is probably my favorite, but Birchmeyer's another company. I don't sell either of those products. I just think they're great products and good companies. And the other thing around spraying too is one of the things that was reminded to me at the conference from Dram, their speaker, was that you're much better off getting even coverage of like a mist versus soaking the plant to where it's just dripping with water. That's actually less effective. So that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, that one's counterintuitive. And I know that Suzanne talks about that with the paint sprayers, and folks are like, well, it's soaked. And I'm like, yeah, but particle size is everything when you're talking about effective sprays. And I have
Yeah.
used Lost Coast, and I will say that they're wonderful people over there. I've just found products like Epishield and Suff Oil to be more effective. So I'm sure it works, but I have had better results with other things. But they're great people.
Sorry, little Nugs. I was replying to a comment. I'll try to keep that to a minimum if it's coming through on the microphone. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things I learned really quick at PhotoX, and then we're getting some awesome questions that I'm highlighting that we'll absolutely circle back to.
Awesome.
So some of the basics are 1% more light equals 1% more yield. That's pretty well accepted. Of course, it's not. You can't take that literally. Certain cultivars are going to perform better than others, and there's all these other environmental factors. But as a general rule, if you apply 1% more light to your crop, you'll get 1% more yield. And the problem with that is when you start getting up 13, 14, 1500 ppfd, you start to see photo bleaching. That's where you get the bracts of the leaves of the bud, and the bud itself will turn white. So essentially, you lose that chlorophyll, and we don't totally know why. Dr. Dave Hawley with Fluence was talking about some of his hypothesis that he's had over the years and how that's changed over time. But they figured out that what causes the photo bleaching is when you get above 500 ppfd of red. And so red is a more efficient spectrum. Red does not impact cannabinoid production or yield or terpene production, none of the secondary metabolite production based on the current research that they shared. So if we can figure out a way to give our plants more red without photo bleaching, we're optimizing the efficiency, and we can save about 20% of the electrical costs associated with growing this plant. So what Fluence has come up with based on all this research, which is kind of took me a while to wrap my brain around it, and I'm still not totally there, which is why I'm hoping to do a follow-up with Fluence on this soon and do a podcast. So we started with metal halide back in the day, which is a whitish, bluish colored light, very low red. And we'd use that for veg. And then we'd use HPS for flower, which was an orangish red spectrum, much higher red. And then we went to white LEDs. Well, then we went to purple, which was just a total random direction. And then we went to full spectrum white LEDs. And now we're back on red again. So I know the two companies I work with, BIOS and Fluence, BIOS just released this Poetry of Plants light, which is supposed to mimic an HPS spectrum. They're claiming it for different secondary metabolite production, similar to what you got with HPS, which goes directly against the research presented at this conference from Fluence, as I'm thinking about this. But Fluence is claiming by putting out a tunable spectrum, which for the long time, what they were saying is you just want a full spectrum white light. Now they're saying there are benefits to tunable spectrum. We figured out what some of those are. And by putting more red into the canopy, we're able to grow with higher efficacy, which allows for more rebates for the guys that are, in commercial places where they have energy rebates. But it also allows us to use less electricity to grow the same crop. And by using a tunable spectrum, and essentially they're calling it the red sandwich. It's not out yet. They're going to be announcing it soon, but we're allowed to talk about it. They're calling it a red sandwich. So you basically have red light below and red light above. So they're going under canopy lighting, not inter canopy. And the research between under and inter was really interesting that they shared too. But under canopy lighting, top lighting, and essentially hitting same levels of, so let's say we hit 1500 ppfd this way, but 600 watts of it is from down below, you're less likely to get photo bleaching by putting the red below and shooting the photons up than you are those same photons down. But it's still, according to them, which I still need some explanation around, it's that total red par level that you're giving the plant at any given time. So by sandwiching the light, what they claimed they got up to was 100 gram one facility or one harvest, 100 grams per square foot, 90% A quality buds, which is crazy numbers. So that's the direction they're taking us, which I think is really interesting. And one of the other things that what happened was I talked to I was sitting at the table with the largest indoor facility in the world. They had something like 117 grow rooms just in the one facility. They had a couple different locations, and they're in Canada. They're called Organogram. They export all around Europe and Australia. I think they're producing over 500 pounds a day of cannabis. Like it's pretty wild numbers. And what the guy was saying is they run about 1500 ppfd top lighting, and they do get they do get photo bleaching on, let's say 5% of the total canopy. But because of that 1% light increase equals 1% yield increase, they're willing to give up some of that to photo bleaching, knowing they can't sell that just as flower. And that goes into this milled product. And I was like, this must be a Canadian American terminology thing. What is this milled product? I never heard of it. Well, what they're doing is they're taking all these different cultivars and sort of creating this like blended pre-roll product that you would take home and make your own, roll your own joint. And the reason they blend it is because then it's hard for another company to copy it. And two, they can hit specific profiles. Similar to like Johnny Walker Black. It was probably the best example I could think of. Like Johnny Walker Black is a blended whiskeys. They create the same flavor profile every year. Like I went to this really cool whiskey event put on by my friend's father-in-law, and I got to try Johnny Walker Black from like the 1920s or the 1930s, and then that same Johnny Walker Black from like 2000s, and they tasted virtually identical. And that's done by blending, these various whiskeys there to create the same profile. It's the same sort of thing with this milled product, and they have ones for bongs. They have ones that are maybe more candy flavored. They have ones, that are maybe more gas. So it's interesting. And I know a lot of consumers like to mix different strains or cultivars together when rolling a joint. Brandon, yes. What did you want to throw out there?
Yeah, so a couple of points on this. Yeah, I like to blend. That's I typically do blend. Just I get a more complex high out of it, I feel like, unless there's something I've got that's really tasty and I just want it by itself. Anytime I hear pre-rolls, I think yuck. I think trash off the floor. So I'm always skeptical about pre-rolls. We all know where that's not your A grade bud that they're making your pre-rolls with. So I'm always skeptical of what I consider to be an effluent stream. It's kind of like corn syrup. Like the corn industry's been amazing with forcing that into our sandwich meat and all kinds of garbage, so that something that they should be paying to clean up, we're paying for. And so yeah, I'm skeptical on pre-rolls, but it's interesting. And I do think that for certain people, there's certain people that treat cannabis like a Budweiser, like a crappy beer, like a Bud Light. And no offense to anybody that likes Bud Light, I just it's not my favorite. And I'm not a drinker anyway, so I'm not qualified to speak on it probably. But there's people that are just looking for a little bit of a buzz, and that might be a really interesting product for them.
Well, it allows them to have better control over potency too, and it's now become 40% of their market, they said, which is really interesting. So there's a big demand for it. I don't even know where. I've never even seen it in the US or even had heard of it. Granted, I've only really been to dispensaries in like Washington, Oregon, Montana. So I haven't really seen all of what's out there, but I thought it was interesting. So
yeah, it's interesting. I did want to go back to the light conversation for just a second, because Toe Jam Kid had some interesting comments there about stretch. And I was wondering the same thing, like with this red sandwich, are they getting a lot more stretch and they just have the ceiling for it and they don't care? Um, that if they're getting a lot of stretch, are they losing some of that penetration that they were targeting? Are they compensating with additional blue and white light? So a bunch of questions there. And then on that same topic, my buddy Paul and I were talking yesterday about the red sandwich, and
Okay.
and you know, specifically, and then we were talking about yes, we're chasing these spectrum targets, but part of what HPS also did was that radiant heat. And is that, you know, like Ben always talks about the covariables, cofactors, is that also part of the magic of, you know, magic of an HPS, you know? Because I know a lot of growers that, myself included, probably, that if HPS were as efficient as LEDs, we'd probably still be running HPS. Um, Thoughts on that? That was a lot.
That was a lot. And I got a little distracted because I was trying to pull up the red sandwich to show you guys what the heck I'm talking about. Can you see my
Yeah, just
screen?
yeah. So are they compensating for that? Are they, as far as the stretch, or they just have high enough ceilings and it doesn't matter, or are they adding enough blue?
So I don't want to misspeak because I didn't totally process and catch everything. I took some notes. I don't have them here in front of me. But this is the red sandwich for those of you that want to see it. And then I took a whole bunch of notes here on spectrum. I don't know if you guys can see this. Essentially, this is some of the information they found though. So like they didn't found far red to be terribly effective. Can you guys read this, or is this way too small, Brandon?
Just barely.
All right, so I'll read it out really quick so I don't misspeak because I haven't memorized all this. So UVB when deployed during flower only hurts yield and potency. Blue at commercial intensities seems to have no significant effect on yield or cannabinoid and terpene concentration, with surprising little effect on morphology. You know, we always heard that blue, you get a smaller inner node length. And then far red doesn't seem to drive yield any more effectively than par light. The Emerson enhancement effect, which is this idea that red and far red together create higher effect than just the lights by themselves. They're saying at the levels that we're applying light at commercial PPFDs, it's not relevant to the discussion. It's just not high enough light intensity. And there may be some benefits to, you know, sunrise, sunset, but results vary so far. They said based on genetics. And when they did see yield improvements, they saw like a massive drop in potency, like THC levels on the trials they did. And then, so basically, this was the section on red. They said commercially interesting because it's cheap to produce red photons, and it does induce photo bleaching when in excess of 500 U-moles per meter squared per second, which is that PPFD. I think that was it. Oh, higher red spectra can be used if scheduled appropriately. By dynamically shifting red and white spectra during development, growers can save an average OPEX savings of OPEX of 19%. So that's what I was saying, that 20% electrical savings. So I think that was all the notes on that. So I can't remember what they said directly in regards to stretching. That would be a great question for a follow-up interview with Fluence.
Nice. Yeah, there's a bunch of great questions in here. So let's
You want to dive into them now? All right, let's do it. I've pinned some of them, but I haven't read all the way down. So I'll just start with the ones in order here. Arizona Grows asks, and thank you, Arizona Grows. I know you check out a lot of these. I appreciate you tuning in. The HLVD episode, the biggest takeaway was that even the testing for it was spotty. You have to test the roots and you need multiple samples. That's correct. And the reason for that is because of virus or viroid load in this case. Similar to COVID, not everyone, not all cultivars or genetics are going to have the same levels of that viroid in their tissue. So it's harder to detect in some plants than others. So you may get a negative, even if there is some viroid presence, but in general, the HLVD there's higher concentrations in the roots than there are in any other part of the plant, and that's why we want to test the roots for HLVD. Now, that being said, it does seem to be like all of the talk around it has really died down quite a bit. I think a lot of people are utilizing tissue culture. They're being a little bit better about IPM and hygiene and things like that. And I haven't heard as much about it, or maybe everyone's just accepting it, but it doesn't seem like it's as much of an issue in 2025 that it was in, the previous 2-3 years. Anything to add there, Brandon?
Nope.
All right, I'll let you take the next one because I've been talking too much. It's Lou Ray asks, could you please explain light tilling on a home garden when is best? What to add before or after tilling, compost, nutrients, aeration, mulch layer, benefits or negatives? And he says, I've been adding, and then it cut out. I missed the rest of the question, but.
Yeah, I can jump into that. So no-till, actually not touching the soil, we know that leads to less diversity and lower population of biology. So that message that no-till is better than tilling is not necessarily accurate for the biology side of it. And I think what a better message would be is no compaction rather than no-till. I personally like to, and I have the capability, the luxury, I should say, that I'm not running a facility. And so it doesn't really matter, my harvest schedule. I can afford to wait until harvest or shortly before to take samples where I can kind of dig up my soil and turn it a little bit for a more homogeneous sample, which I really like. And my preference is to harvest, then take my samples, because that way I can turn my soil really thoroughly. That way I don't have any stratification. These 10 and 12 inches that we like for, irrigation management, you're not really going to compact anything, if you turn it. So I think that it fluffs up your soil, adds tilth to the soil, or improves the tilth, I should say. Misspoke there. It prevents stratification. It is less likely to get anaerobic pockets, if you turn, and you'll get a better sample, a more representational sample by doing that. So I'm all about it. I think that it's a great idea. I think that not tilling can lead to some issues, but no compaction is really the message from me.
Yeah, tilling got a bad rap because on the agricultural scale, when we were tilling the earth as a society, what we were doing was we were destroying the soil structure. We were creating a level of compaction, whatever, 6-8 inches down. And then that topsoil, which is the most fertile part of our soil profile, was essentially just getting blown away, which was what created the Dust Bowl back in the day historically. And so that's why tilling got such a bad rap. Now, since then, we've learned how to till with less disturbance to the soil microorganisms. We've learned how to be more effective about it. And realistically, in your home garden, you're not losing a lot of topsoil. You probably have, soilless media in there anyway in your garden beds. But that's why tilling got such a bad rap. And so people went straight to no-till, which I think there's a lot of cases to be said for not having soil disturbance in certain situations, but it's very nuanced. It's not a black and white situation. So yes, I think for a home garden, if you have, if you need to turn over weeds or you want to prep the soil for your next season and you want to incorporate in more fertilizer or more aeration or add more organic matter, that's a great way to do it. And a broad fork is like the best tool to have. I'm jealous that Brandon has one.
I have a broad fork for outside, and then for my indoor gardens, I bought like a kid's pitchfork. It's just a normal pitchfork blade, but it's a little bit more narrow, but it's got a little short handle, and it's just perfect for getting in, breaking up beds. And then like when I amend, I want to turn my soil again, because especially for anything that controls pH, And anything for phosphorus, you really want to make sure that those are homogeneously mixed throughout the entire substrate.
Yeah, I'll get in there with my hands when I go to mix in my fertilizers typically, but yeah, I use a short-handled shovel, same concept. And when I was wetting my beds, because they were so dry, I actually added the water, and then when I came back in the next time before putting more water in, I mixed the soil because you have all these different pockets of hydration and hydrophobic soil. And so I was just trying to homogenize it. So that's another good time to mix up the soil.
Now here's a pro tip from an old fart. Something I like to do, and I'm surprised that more gardeners don't know this. But before you go to work in your soil, wash your hands and then rake your fingers over that bar of soap, and you'll get soap up under your nails. That way, when you come in, you wash your hands and there's no dirt under your nails. Just that's one of the easiest things in
Yeah,
the world. And like, I'm amazed when yeah, I just assume every grower knows that. But yeah,
I never heard that one. I'll have to try that.
I learned that from my
It's
mom
unique.
when I was a little kid. And
Huh.
yeah, but it's great. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Okay. Is spinosad a nerve agent that can affect human consuming the crop it has been used on? Good question, Kyle. So spinosad, and again, I'm not a total expert on this, but it's a chemical, and I think there's two different chemicals. There's two
A
different
and
like
D. Yeah.
A and B. Okay,
A and
that
D.
are A and D. All right, that are produced. They are very toxic to insects. They're toxic to bees, but they have very low mammalian toxicity. They're also toxic to a lot of aquatic marine life. So you want to be careful around any body of water. But they're very effective as an option. Sorry, for dealing with certain pests. So yeah, I think they're fairly safe. There was no evidence of cancer or anything, I think, in trials with dogs. So yeah, I mean, with any pesticide, I think it's always good to have a critical eye and be skeptical and do some research before using them. I'm very careful with all microbial products personally, and I always use proper PPE. But relatively speaking, as at least from everything that I know, it's a fairly safe option for folks to use for dealing with certain pests.
And it is a nerve agent, but it doesn't affect us in the same way, mammals in the same way. I
Yes.
saw somebody say use it indoors, not outdoors. If you are using it outdoors, you want to time it for late in the day when there aren't bees around because it's very toxic to bees. And like Tad said, PPE, I wear N95 as a minimum if I'm spraying spinosad, and I wear nitriles usually if I'm spraying spinosad. And then if I'm doing any kind of biologicals, I'm wearing a mask. Silica, you want to make sure you're wearing a mask and some kind of eye protection. Um, any kind of dusts, sulfur, anything like that. Just mixing up nutrient packs, you might want to throw on a mask and goggles if you're sensitive. Um,
Yeah, I do. I'm allergic to everything, and spinosad does have a low skin toxicity, I believe, or low skin absorption, I think. So it's relatively safe on your hands. But yeah, it never hurts to throw on PPE when you're working in your garden for sure.
yeah.
Uh, Crippled Cannabis Cowboy asked, put your replace back guano with, didn't see it on the
I
website.
responded to this email earlier from Crippled
Okay.
Cannabis Cowboy. So you should have a response there, but I said bone meal and soft rock, Calfos brand.
Yeah,
And
we've never sold guanos. I don't really believe in guanos. They are very effective if you need available phosphorus. We can always tell on a soil test who's using guano because that available P level is really high. So it does work, but it's just not a very ecological or sustainable option, in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
we
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 don't sell it.
spent about 30 minutes on guanos last week, so
Oh, okay,
we
sweet.
we gave it the business. Yeah.
All right. Silosin asks, is there no way to avoid a constant minor iron deficiency in living soil because of the pH? Brandon, you want to take this first?
Yeah. So in the salt world, the ionic world, most folks are familiar with chelated forms of iron, and there's, I don't know, half dozen commonly used chelated iron products out there for salt growers that make them available at a wide range of pHs, because we use a high pH and it's not soluble at the, particularly soluble at the pH targets 6, 8 to 7 that we're usually going for. A lot of folks, almost every garden I walk into has that little constant minor iron deficiency, which is the very top of the plant. The petiole end is lighter than the tip, so it's lighter towards darker on the tip, and you see it all the time. I don't ever see it impacting anybody severely, once in a blue moon, and never really doing anything to their harvest metric. But for some folks, it just visually it bothers them and they're concerned about that iron. And so if you want to get that up, the easiest things to do would be adding worms or a little bit of fulvic acid to your beds to work as chelators for that iron. I don't worry about it too much, but if you want to take care of it, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Bryant Mason, Soul Doctor Consulting, about this very topic. And he talks about in one of our podcasts, and basically what he did with one facility is they create a pocket of iron down by the root system. And that by doing that, they were able to get an area of the soil that was low enough pH that they were able to see the iron creep up on tissue tests. The challenge with that is when you go to re-amend your soil, you can start, it gets tricky because you have to ignore your iron levels. If you disturb that iron pocket, you're now going to have probably too high of iron levels, even if it's unavailable. So it could, raise your osmotic pressure on the root system and things like that. So it's not a perfect solution, but that was one workaround for a commercial facility. And if you want to check out Bryant's podcast, I know he talks in more detail about it. So, all right, Brandon, how should I go about releasing Persimolis in flower? Can I make my own sachets and hang them on branches?
Okay, great question. So a lot of folks who are familiar with beneficials, I'm assuming you might have two spot, because that is the Persimolis is the two spot specialist. But a lot of folks who are familiar with beneficials know that you can get them in a couple of different product offerings, or I don't know how to, but you can get them with different carriers, brand. There's a couple different carriers that you can shake on, and you don't want to use those in flower, obviously, because they'll get stuck to your trichomes, and then you've got this weird stuff. Sometimes it can cause mold, but for the most part, it's just going to be something that you don't want to smoke and doesn't have, any kind of beneficial terpene or anything like that. So you don't want that. It's not attractive. It would make it very hard to sell. So you want to use sachets when you're in flower. So if you have purchased some like loose Persimolis in a tube or something that's packed with bran as a carrier, I would probably be more inclined to water, let my soil dry down a little bit, and then go spread that around under my canopy in the hopes that they're going to crawl up looking for food. Making your own sachets sounds like a lot of labor. I wouldn't try to make like a sachet like BioBee makes, because they use teeny tiny little holes. I would basically just want to make a little bucket, a small bucket that you could pour some of that in, and then you could hang that up in your canopy, and that way they're already up there and they'll move around. But I wouldn't try to make an actual sachet. I would just make a little paper pocket and pour some of that in, and you could spread that around. That'd be a little easier.
Personally, I'd probably discourage that altogether, because they have a lot of research around how these sachets are created, how they release. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot of science that goes into it, believe it or not. They're not just like stuffing immature insects into these paper sachets and then hoping they leave. They actually have a very specific amount of a food source. They have different life stages in there sometimes. So they can have a very good idea of when these insects are going to be crawling out to do their thing. So
But if you
I
but
don't.
if you are in flower and you do have loose persimmons, you can't shake them out on top. I would think proximity would help. Just, if you took a post-it note and made a little envelope out of it that you didn't close and hung that up right under your canopy with a paper clip. It's like kind of what I'm envisioning as like a home grower trying to get them closer in proximity to the target as opposed to just sprinkling on. Because you know, I don't know how effective that is to sprinkle on the surface. So I'm thinking if you can get them up higher, that would be better. But yeah, you're 100% right with the science and engineering that goes into the sachets.
Yeah, I don't know if it's worth it. Like you're absolutely right. Like once you're in, depending on where you are in flower, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Depending on what your target pest is, I'm assuming spider mites here, but I don't actually know. Um, it may just be too late, and that's one of the reasons why everyone emphasizes having really clean plants going into flower and doing all this, the beneficial insects and things early on in the cycle before you are in flower, and make sure your plants are 100% healthy before you flip them. I'm not Fried Piper. I'm not suggesting you didn't do those things. Stuff can still happen. You may miss a hot spot or something like that too. So this isn't a critique of you or a criticism. That's just why the advice exists for people to do that.
Yeah.
Is because once you're in your mid to late flower, beneficials aren't going to do you a lot of good. You can't use a lot of oils and sprays. You're kind of stuck. It's really tough.
A dust buster, a vacuum can be, as silly as that sounds, can be one way to get large numbers out. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, you're just going to have to kind of suffer through it and then come in strong and clean the next cycle.
Beneficials are great preventatively, prophylactically. They're not particularly effective curatively. I've wasted a lot of money trying to use beneficials curatively, and I can attest that it doesn't work.
Now, one thing that might make you feel better is there is, research, and we know that spider mites, through the damage and stress that they put on plants, may give you higher secondary metabolite or cannabinoid content in your plant because of stress. So they may lower your yield, they may be annoying, but you might end up with slightly better weed for it. So that's the one bonus side, I guess, if there's any, silver lining to this situation. All right, let's see here. The next question I saw was, in a 15-gallon living soil pot, how much and how should I add potassium sulfate? They say in week 2 of flower.
I can take a
Oh,
stab.
that's all you. Yeah.
Okay. So I would typically, folks can add it, and it depends. You could definitely mess up, and that, we want to talk about cation balance. Calcium, magnesium, and potassium are the productive ones. Sodium's there, but we don't want that one. And so there's ratios of how much calcium to magnesium, magnesium to potassium. We can't just put a ton in there and it'll be okay. They can create antagonistic relationships so that the one can outcompete. So calcium could block magnesium, magnesium could block potassium. So we want to be measured about this, but on average, Tad, Ben, myself, we look at these soil reports, and most folks can use a little bit of extra potassium around week 3 is when I normally prescribe that, and I prescribe it as potassium sulfate, and it's usually a cup to a half a cup. And so the safe rate, if you don't have a soil test in hand, would be to do it.
Brand, that's for a yard, right?
Right, that's for a yard.
This is a 15-gallon pot, so I just want to make sure that that's really clear so people don't put a half a cup on a 15-gallon pot.
Yeah, I already did the math for him. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But so he, so that's for a yard of soil. You're in a 15-gallon. You could do 1.18, or you could do, a half a mil per would be the low rate per gallon. So you could do 7.5 mils for a 15-gallon. So that's the math. I would go in on that low end, though, if you don't have a soil test in hand.
Nice.
But just, mix it up in water, a gallon of water would be plenty.
So Cheddar Bob 13 asks, and he says there are cleavers, which I didn't know what that was, but then later in comments, I think that was supposed to be clovers.
Well, okay, I was wondering too. I thought.
Yeah, because someone down below commented something with the word clover. So I'm assuming that you mean clovers. The clovers grow in your bed, which I'm not unhappy with because my wife makes a tincture with them. But I'm curious if you think it's drawing more nutrients than I would think. Yes and no. I've seen some agronomists say it's rather negligible, the amount of nutrients that it pulls. I've definitely seen also, though, on soil tests, a larger draw from people, a larger drawdown of nutrients from people that are running cover crops. To me, the biggest issue is not nutrients, it's more pest management. So that bed's going to look really nice, but it's going to be a lot harder to till if you do want to disturb the soil, like for the reasons that we talked about earlier on in the show. Love clover. So if you get an outbreak, it's very hard to manage. Now you have to manage it on 2 crops instead of just 1. So that could be more challenging. So it's more just pest and pathogen habitat that I worry about with these things. You're not getting a really noticeable amount of nitrogen from the clover. And a lot of even the people who are pro cover crop have moved away from clovers as part of their cover crop plan from what I've seen.
Yeah, the clover's not there, benevolently, fixing nitrogen out of the atmosphere. The clover's not actually doing it anyway. It's cyanobacteria that does it, but that infects the root, and then that's assimilating this nitrogen. It's not donating that to your cannabis plant. It's using that for itself. And so unless you leave that in the soil and turn it under, then it's not really adding anything. I think that's a misconception that a lot of people they think of it as like little nitrogen pumps, and it's holding that for itself. And obviously, if you kill that clover and turn it under, then it becomes available, but otherwise not.
Steve says, just joined the live. What can I do to stop bud rot and powdery mildew this time of year's outdoor from Kentucky? This could probably be a whole hour-long conversation. I will just jump in really quick first and say there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do if you're outdoor. It's really more about harvest timing. You can remove some of the worst leaves, or if you do see botrytis, bud rot, you can remove that. But once it's there, those spores are in the air. There's not a lot you can do to prevent them from landing on your plant and causing an infection. There are some products out there like Botry Stop from Bioworks that is microbial based that may help somewhat, but I wouldn't put it on there and expect now that you're protected or you're cured of botrytis. It just doesn't work that well, but it may help you manage it. But really, you gotta realize that once you see botrytis, the spores are everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's just a matter. You're just playing a ticking time bomb game with your plant. That's why I don't grow outdoors anymore out here. I might try some autos next year, but it's just too challenging. Interestingly enough, I did learn something at PhotoX, now that you brought it up, that I would like to share because I thought this was fascinating. So botrytis feeds on dead tissues, interestingly enough. Powdery mildew feeds on living tissue. So it doesn't want to kill the host. And so this guy was presenting that they've actually discovered a second genetic marker in cannabis for powdery mildew. So now we have 2. There was one originally discovered by Seth Crawford out of Oregon CBD, I think, and now Aurora Cannabis up in British Columbia discovered another one. And so what he was saying is the way it works, this is what was fascinating to me, is because powdery mildew wants living tissue, it infects into the cellular wall of the plant, and sort of the canidia establishes itself in there. The plants that show powdery mildew resistance, the mechanism that they do is they actually kill that cell. The plant kills the cell so the powdery mildew can't infect it there. So you have all these places, and they showed this with a microscope. It was really fascinating, infected versus uninfected, and the uninfected leaf looks, totally healthy. And the reason why, when they zoomed way in, was because the little cell where that Canidia goes to infect, it wasn't able to, because the plant causes cell death at that location. Just amazing to me. I didn't even know that was possible. So that was something that I thought was fascinating that I did not know about powdery mildew. I will reiterate, it's very well established. It's not systemic. So we don't need to have that debate. That's science has proven that to be not true. I know that was floating around the cannabis industry. Brandon, what do you want to add to the conversation on that?
The apoptosis, the cell death, the purposeful cell death to protect itself is a really fascinating mechanism to me. There's several plants that do this. Back to the just real quickly, back to the clover conversation. It was actually Cleaver's, looks like Galium aparine, or I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's the sticky plant. And so that would actually probably, because that plant puts on so much biomass, I just cleared a bunch of it out of the garlic patch out here. You might get some significant removal from that. So that's different from clover. There is no nitrogen fixing with cleavers, so that's a different conversation. But back to the bud rot and powdery mildew this time of year, Fusarium, Botrytis, Pythium, PM. Those are the things that we're all scared of this time of year. Just like beneficial insects, it's not going to be great as a curative to use, the very few products that we can legally and ethically use. So you want to start using these, a month, 2 months out before you expect your weather to get bad. I like a rotation of root shield, trichoderma, in my soil. That same week, I will do a foliar with cease, which is Bacillus subtilis. Then the next week, I would do my drench with the cease, the Bacillus subtilis, and then do a foliar with the bow tree stop. And so if you get those going, on a every other week basis, a month out at least, you've got a much better shot at making it to the finish line. Obviously, you want to start with some really good genetics. I'll plug the homie Chad Westport's. His No Joke is the best plant I've ever seen as far as outdoors, just getting rained on, fogged out, and I lost, maybe 7 grams off of a multi-pound plant. But getting those in there early, those products in particular. And then you want to run Agsil 16. It's too late now, but you want to run silica and make sure your potassium and calcium numbers are pinged all the way through on the fertility side. That will help a lot as well.
Awesome. Yeah, genetics. I should have brought that up. That's a good point. That's your best option. Getting something that's going to finish early or has some level of resistance is going to be huge for dealing with that.
And
awesome. Okay, I'm going to
cut it off, bag it, and get it out of there. But the spores are everywhere at this point.
Yeah, I'm going to skip some questions and come back to them just to answer a few rapid fire ones so we can get to them. So Bryant does not have his own podcast. I have a podcast called Cannabis Cultivation and Science, and Bryant Mason has been on it 3 or 4 times. If you're really interested in understanding soil science for like soilless media, peat, cocoa, those sorts of things, and soil testing, I can't recommend him enough. He's a good friend, colleague in the industry. Great guy, very knowledgeable. So yeah, Bryant Mason. So if you go to the KiS website and go to the Learn tab and go to podcast, or even just search on our website for Bryant, it'll pop up all of his podcasts, and you can check it out.
Yeah, can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah, he's a good dude. 420 High Hopes ask, approximately how much does living soil weigh? For example, 10 gallons dry versus 10 gallons wet. This is going to vary depending on how much rock dust you use in your soil, how much peat moss, the compost. So we can give you very rough ranges by the yard, and then you can kind of break it down to 10 gallons, knowing that there's about 200 gallons in a yard. So our soils range from low end, let's say 750 pounds per yard when it's pretty dry, up to, I would say, 1,200 pounds when very wet, like fully saturated. As a general rule, I think around 1,000 pounds a yard is a good number to go with. But if you were like designing a bench or something, you had to make sure if you flooded, it wasn't going to break. Then I'd go with something like 13 or 1,400 pounds just to be on the safe side. So, yeah, that's all I have to say on that. Spencer says trichoderma also chelates iron for plants as well as a number of bacillus products. I think that's really interesting. I'd love to see research about how effective it is in some of these, what we call living soil systems. I haven't seen a lot of research on it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist or this doesn't happen. I'd just be really curious to learn more about it.
Trichoderma is a well-known, effective biology for breaking down and making available nutrients. So that's really interesting. I'm going to do some reading later. Thank you.
How effective do you think systemic control for thrips is? I'm going to say not at all. So this claim by SNS, Sierra Natural Science, a lot of these kinds of claims are based off of one paper or something that's done in the lab. If SNS 209 was that effective at dealing with thrips, every houseplant owner and every cannabis grower in the world would be using right now. They'd be a multi-billion-dollar company. I'm just very, very skeptical when any systemic is also means too that it's in the leaf tissue of the plant itself. And we don't want anything to be systemic when we're growing cannabis. So keep that in mind too. The only systemic things that I'm aware of are things like Eagle 20, paclobutrazol, pretty nasty stuff that are effective at doing, plant growth hormones and regulators or pesticides in the case of Eagle 20. But you absolutely don't want to smoke that shit because it's cancerous and dangerous and toxic to your body, which is why we avoid anything systemic. So, yeah, I doubt. I guess my point is I highly doubt it's systemic. It may have some, topical mortality, kill rates, but I think there's better options. Brandon, what is your take on over applying gypsum creates harsh smoke?
I don't. For the I can't remember a time that I over applied gypsum. Harsh smoke, I have conversations about terpenes and things like that with folks and harsh smoke all the time and things you can do. Obviously, you've got to start with the best genetics, and if there's no terps at the end of the round, it's not going to magically show up with a good cure, So I think most folks are hip to, lowering their temps and cutting off CO2 towards the end of a round, CO2 just so it will finish, it won't delay senescence, and then lowering those temperatures so you preserve your terpenes, and then a proper cure. I grew salts for decades, and I've cured some fried pot really well, and it smoked well. So I tend to think that it's probably something in the finished product or the cure that needs to get adjusted.
Yeah, I'm not going to give advice on smoking. I'm going to stay in my lane after all this nonsense with Build a Soil over the last couple weeks.
You have the right to your opinion, man.
What I will say is I have not seen any research to support this idea around gypsum. And from what I know of gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, just the solubility rate of it would make it very, very difficult to over apply. Now, if you're applying gypsum in combination with a bunch of egg lime or wollastonite or oyster shell flour, and your calcium numbers are through the roof, sure, maybe there's something there where too much calcium gets into the leaf tissue, but probably not from gypsum. It's probably, the question really should be, what's your take on over applying calcium?
Yeah, gypsum,
and that would be a more interesting conversation.
Gypsum has a really unique, interesting release mechanism that and don't try to prove me wrong on this, but it's hard to over apply gypsum. You can put too much in and your calcium rates will stay fairly steady. So yeah.
All right, we got to go rapid fire here. We're almost out of time. but I want to tackle the last couple questions really fast. So, Brandon, what is the benefit of adding extra potassium in week 2 or 3 of flower?
So we typically want more of a 1-to-1 towards the end, and potassium is a really unique element in that you need luxury amounts in the soil to get the levels you need in the plant. That's a topic for a whole podcast of itself.
1-to-1 of what?
Nitrogen and potassium, I'm sorry,
Okay,
closer
thank
to
you.
that. And then just from looking at thousands of soil reports, I just started seeing that the one thing that everybody had in common, because they're all over the place, the one thing that I was seeing that everybody had in common was they were really low on their potassium. And so once we started recommending doing that 3rd week application, all of a sudden people were landing better, and then it's tied to your harvest metric. So
It's tied to your yields. Yeah. So
yep.
having appropriate levels of potassium should increase your yields, but it's also a highly mobile element in that you can absolutely leach it out of your soil from your watering. So that's another reason why we find adding it has some benefits. In terms of our soil mixes, Plant Guardian, you could use any of them in the sip style grow. We have growers doing it commercially and home growers, so it's possible with both. There's a lot that you have to think about in terms of the physical properties of the soil, but most of these peat-based soils are similar enough that I wouldn't worry about it too much.
If I was using a sip, I would bump up my aeration a little bit and maybe use wicks, but that's a long conversation.
Yeah. So this is a deeper conversation too, Jarrett. The benefits of cover crops. You got some good answers just from people in the chat, so I'm going to put those on the screen and then comment myself. But these are great reasons Dank Gardner lists for why you would use a cover crop. So they help break up soil compaction. They help cycle nutrients. They help keep microbes happy and thriving. They help with moisture retention, so you get less moisture loss on the surface. You get less risk of erosion. It's essentially a living mulch in a lot of ways, and it helps add organic matter to depleted soils that are low in organic matter. Now, indoors, we don't have a lot of those issues. So I personally don't recommend cover crops indoors, and I can give you all the reasons why. We have a whole, I can't read that.
I was giving Dark Water the thumbs up.
Oh, yeah, we have a whole blog post on why, if you want to read the reasoning behind why we don't recommend it indoors in most cases. That's also why we don't recommend chop and drop. It's mostly an IPM thing because we don't want to deal with the risk of added pathogen pressure and pest pressure associated with it. But that being said, a lot of people do it successfully in their grow on the home grow scale, and it's perfectly fine. So you can make the choice on that. Yeah, I think that is it for today.
Yeah, we covered a lot of good ground today. Thank you guys, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate you guys showing up.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for all the love. Take care.